Hi everybody, I'm Jack, the Rambling Raconteur, and I'm here with a quick review and discussion of The Jew of Malta by Christopher Marlowe. I have the Penguin Classics edition of his complete plays. This is I want to say 1589-1590 was when it was first performed, so it just narrowly predates Shakespeare, maybe 3 or 4 years. And it is very much in the Elizabethan Jacobean tragedy, the English Renaissance tragedy. Marlowe's interesting. So I've read, at this point now, this was the last of the Marlowe plays I had to read. I shouldn't say had to read, but chose to read. And his work to me feels very different from Shakespeare's. It feels very much more akin to the Jacobean revenge tragedies, or the tragedies of Euripides specifically, than anything Shakespeare really does. Outside of Shakespeare's very early plays that are so clearly influenced by Marlowe. So plays like Titus, Andronicus very much feels like it could have been written by Christopher Marlowe. The Henry VI trilogy, parts 1 through 3, those feel Marlowean. But overall, Marlowe very much feels like he belongs more closely to that Jacobean school than Shakespeare really does. So The Jew of Malta, part of the reason I tapped into this was I had been thinking about reading some English Renaissance plays, and then I was watching Steve Donahue's Penguin Classics tour, and he was hitting English Renaissance plays and the Jacobean tragedies, and then he did Marlowe, and I was like, I don't know if I've ever read The Jew of Malta. And then I realized people are reading all sorts of texts around religion for the maybe Midrash event, and I thought, this is sort of like adjacent to that. Why not dip in? And Marlowe's plays are about 100 pages, so you can read it in one day, 1 or 2 sittings really, and that's what it was for me. On the whole, Jew of Malta feels very much like Marlowe's other plays. It feels very much a piece of his oeuvre as a whole. He creates a specific type of character, which is called sort of an overreaching protagonist, I think is how Penguin refers to it. I think of it, because I used to run track and then I coached track and cross country for years, as overstriding. So someone, in order to catch up, will try to take longer and longer steps and then inevitably pull a muscle. I did it at one point, and I'm extremely tall, so my stride was already long. But Marlowe's characters overstride. They bring to mind a quote from Nietzsche, I believe though it's from Zarathustra, not Beyond Good and Evil, but a quote from Nietzsche: the shortest distance between 2 peaks is a single step, but it requires long legs and the courage to take it. And that's Marlowe's characters in a nutshell, his main characters in a nutshell. They're consistently trying to reach something, they're consistently trying to fool someone, consistently trying to achieve some conquest or achieve romantic, political, geopolitical, financial. They're trying to achieve some conquest, and they will reach for it and fall. They will overstride and end up hurting themselves fatally in most cases. And that's true of basically every extant play we have of Marlowe's. We have a character who simply doesn't know when to stop. And Barabbas, the Jew of Malta, very much feels like that type of character. He, throughout the play, achieves a number of clever successes where he finds ways to advance and recoup lost money or recoup lost power, but he ultimately goes one too far, and then it all falls down on him, quite literally, and he's doomed. So that shouldn't be a huge spoiler. Most characters in these tragedies don't end well. So to get more towards what Marlowe's like, I want to just give an example, a real quick example of sort of his iambic pentameter, and he really pushed that. He helped push that as an alternative to rhyme royal, and some of the other almost like poetic traditions that went back to Chaucer, so went back a couple of 100 years. Marlowe was one of the advanced vanguard who helped break that down and said, hey, this iambic pentameter might be a better poetic form. This blank verse might be a better poetic form for these dramas. So, as an example, thus trolls. This is Barabbas, the namesake Jew of Malta. Thus trolls our fortune in by land and sea, and thus are we on every side enriched. These are the blessings promised to the Jews, and herein was old Abram's happiness. What more may heaven do for earthly man than thus to pour out plenty in their laps, ripping the bowels of the earth for them, making the sea their servant and the winds to drive their substance with successful blasts? Who hateth me but for my happiness? Or who is honored now but for his wealth? Rather had I, a Jew, be hated thus, than pitied in a Christian poverty. For I can see no fruits in all their faith, but malice, falsehood, and excessive pride, which methinks fits not their profession. Haply some hapless man hath conscience, and for his conscience lives in beggary. They say we are a scattered nation. I cannot tell, but we have scrambled up more wealth by far than those that brag of faith. There's Kiriajerum, the great Jew of Greece, Obed in Berseth, Nons in Portugal, myself in Malta, some in Italy, many in France, and wealthy every one. I wealthier far than any Christian. I must confess we come not to be kings. That's not our fault. Alas, our numbers few, and crowns come either by succession or urged by force, and nothing violent, oft have I heard tell, can be permanent. Give us a peaceful rule, make Christians kings, that thirst so much for principality. I have no charge, nor many children, but one sole daughter, whom I hold as dear as Agamemnon did his Iphigenia. And all I have is herds. But who comes here? And so you get that sense of like flowing ideas, that when you have 10 syllables, you can sometimes fit a sentence on a line, that you can actually have the language flow in a sense, and still have like a rhythm to it. And I apologize if my reading is not rhythmic enough or too rhythmic. But within that soliloquy, yeah, that's a soliloquy, not a monologue, we get some of the themes that pop up in this work. So a quick one right there is at the end, where Barabbas compares himself to Agamemnon and his sole daughter Abigail to Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia. Agamemnon famously sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia in order to launch the Trojan fleet on Troy. Marlowe's readers would have been expected to kind of understand that and know that that's arguably like one of the worst father-daughter comparisons to make. And Marlowe's doing that on purpose. He also makes a point about he's not a king. There really aren't any Jewish kings at this time. But we'll see that Barabbas is going to ultimately connive some level of political power that's completely unasked for. And so he sort of like achieves a sense of kingship there in Malta. And we also see a weird sense, and it brings up the next piece of this work that's so important, which is this a massive anti-Semitic play? Is Marlowe an anti-Semite? And we can't really tell that from this vantage hundreds of years later. We don't have Marlowe to interrogate. We don't have an enormous number of personal diaries or letters of his to be able to go interrogate and say, yes, this guy was an anti-Semite. This man, hated Jews. He wanted to, condemn Jews and punish them or something. We don't have that. I think a question we can ask is, was Marlowe's society anti-Semitic? To which we could resoundingly say yes. The English famously expelled the Jews hundreds of years earlier. There were, I can't remember if they were called conversos or convertos, but they were people who had Jewish parents or Jewish ancestors who had converted and were held under deep, deep, deep suspicion. They would continually be, round up the usual suspects, and they would bring in the people who had some type of Jewish ancestry, but had been converted either to Protestant Christianity or Catholicism. And anti-Semitism was not just contained within England at that time, but it existed across large swaths of Europe. This play is interesting in that we have the characters who are in Malta. We see a couple of characters from Spain. We have Barabbas. We have some Turkish characters who are kind of coming to invade. And so we kind of bring all of these together and let these different cultural conflicts stew. And there's no question that there are anti-Semitic characters within the play. Like the government of Malta is anti-Semitic. When told you're going to have to produce 10 years of tribute to Turkey and the Sultan, or we're going to come down on you and wipe you out, they immediately turn and say, well, everybody who's a Jew on Malta is going to contribute half of his or her wealth. And you can get out of that if you convert. But if you don't, we need half your wealth. And Barabbas famously says, no, neither. I choose option C, and they then strip him of all of his wealth. And so the entire play is him trying to recoup that wealth and wreak vengeance on those who have wronged him. And have they wronged him? Yes. Is Barabbas also a creep and a bad guy? Yes. And that's what makes this difficult. One of the things that's interesting is there's a definite allusion to a passage from the Gospel of John that has sometimes been used to justify anti-Semitic acts of violence. And so the governor of Malta says, no, Jew, we take particularly thine to save the ruin of a multitude, and better one want for a common good than many perish for a private man. Yet, Barabbas, we will not banish thee, but here in Malta, where thou gotst thy wealth, live still, and if thou canst, get more. Better one want for a common good than many perish for a private man is a direct allusion to what Caiaphas says in the Gospel of John in chapter 11, talking about killing Jesus so that, so that the Romans then do not view all of Judea as being in uproar. So, again, it's hard to tell whether or not Marlowe himself is anti-Semitic, but I think we can just admit historically his society certainly was, and there are anti-Semitic attitudes within the play. He does bring this interesting piece, though, where he exposes the hypocrisy of a group of friars. So Barabbas does recoup his wealth. He regains a huge amount of wealth. He commits multiple murders to do it. He poisons some. He leads others to fight each other, all sorts of things. But he at one point offers to cousin these different friars who represent different orders to I'm going to give up all my wealth and join a holy order and become a monk. I just need to pray and seek peace. And we know this is utter BS. But we see then what happens, and Friar Jacquemin goes, oh, good, Barabbas, come to our house. And Friar Barnardine, oh, good, Barabbas, come to our house. And Barabbas, and Barabbas says, oh, I've sinned, but I have all this wealth. And, oh, Barabbas, their laws are strict. I know they are, and I will be with you. And the other goes, no, they wear no shirts, and they go barefoot too. Barabbas said, then 'tis not for me, and I am resolved. You shall confess me and have all my goods. Good, Barabbas, come to me. And so they keep, bad-mouthing how willingly the other order does penance and, absolves themselves of worldly goods in order to get Barabbas to come join their group. And it just shows that level of hypocrisy. And Marlowe has this running throughout the play that, yeah, Barabbas is an unpleasant dude, but so is everybody else. Everybody else, in fact, is arguably as bad or worse than Barabbas, just about. Maybe the Turks are more honest. They might be the only ones who are more honest than Barabbas. And that's saying something for Marlowe to write this at a time when much of Europe views the Ottoman Empire as sort of like the most single dangerous foreign power that they're interacting with. The one other thing I just wanted to jump out was there's a cool call out to a line of Marlowe's from his famous play, The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, Come Live With Me and Be My Love. And that was published after his death in 1599. I don't know when he wrote it, but within this, character says, content, but we will leave this paltry land and sail from hence to Greece, to lovely Greece. I'll be thy Jason, thou my golden fleece, where painted carpets o'er the meads are hurled, and Bacchus vineyards overspread the world. Where woods and forests go in goodly green, I'll be Adonai, thou shalt be love's queen. The meads, the orchards, and the primrose lanes, instead of sedge and reed, bear sugar canes. Thou in those groves, by dis above, shalt live with me and be my love. And so, as I was reading, I was just like, whoa, that's his poem. And within that little snippet, we also see the pastoral sense that Marlowe brought out in a little bit of his poetry, something that wasn't super common in England at the time. So that's The Jew of Malta. Some other works that sort of remind me of it. Euripides comes to mind, where Euripides always sort of gives away the entire plot in the first chorus or the first two monologues of characters, and then is just content to show off his poetry and have that be, you know, his diction. That's the diction of his characters. That's the whole point of reading a play by Euripides. It's not to necessarily undergo deep drama. Marlowe's the same way. Characters don't really change in Marlowe. They say who they are. That is who they are. He, in a sense, connects the dots, as kind of how I've always referred to it as. He connects the dots. He gives us a set of characters, and we sort of just see what happens. Like this happened, this happened, this. What is the logical extension if you take this type of character and let it run? Shakespeare famously would develop a sense of inwardness, inner voice, interiority, where we see characters changing. We see characters thinking and changing because they're thinking. That doesn't really happen in Marlowe. So Euripides comes to mind. The different revenge tragedians, John Webster famously from the Jacobeans, but Thomas Kyd, Thomas Middleton, Cyril Tourneur. I have the 4 revenge tragedies, which I really enjoy and highly recommend. The prologue of the play is delivered by Machiavelli, or Machiavelli, whose influence on Elizabethan thought was profound, in my opinion. Particularly works like The Prince, not the discourses. So that's The Jew of Malta. Again, an interesting play by a solid playwright. So thank you, everybody. Bye.